So you've got your why, you've got your purpose, and you've got your manipulation. Now, manipulation, when people talk about hard versus soft magic systems, this is actually what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
How many rules are there around your manipulation that the reader knows about? Not that you know about, that the reader knows about. And it's a spectrum. It's not like a fixed, it's not your magic system is either hard or soft. It exists somewhere on a spectrum. Um, if it's very hard, it's close to the Brandon Sanderson side. If it's very soft, it's close to the Tolkien side.
Mm-hmm.
And in between exists all spectrums.
Right.
And manipulation is basically like, do you need a ritual? Do you cast spells? Do you just call on the power and weave it together in threads? Do you, just think of what you manifest, what you want done? Like whatever you have to do to manipulate the power.
Releasing your inner dragon. All right, Marie, we got another kind of world building topic that our producer would like us to delve into. So let's start with, because we're going to talk about magic and magic systems and just kind of ramble on through this topic. But let's start with the beginning. Like, where do you start? What do you think about when you're going to create a new IP and you're like, okay, but let me start with the magic system? What is kind of the first couple of thoughts that you're thinking about and why?
So the first thought that I ask myself about a magic system is, what is the purpose of the magic system in the story? Is it to be a cool factor? And that's fine. That can be your answer, right? Is it to be a cool factor? Is it to be part of the thematic element of the story? Does it tie into the cause of the problem? Does it tie into the solution of the problem? Because your approach is different depending on which one. But I want to know what purpose the magic serves in the context of the world that I'm building. So I'll give you an example. I was playing around with like the concept of some sentient elephants and writing a story with sentient elephants. And I thought that it would be cool to put such a theme around whether it is better to adapt to your environment or to force your environment to adapt to you, right? And I thought that for such a theme, it would be very interesting to have a mathematical system, because mathematics is a theoretical construct of how the world should live, should look, right? That's what it is. It's not like science, which describes existence. Mathematics says this is the rules of the thing. And if you base your whole magic system around that, then, because my point in the theme would be, it's better to adapt to your environment than to force your environment. Okay, so I said, okay, well, if I then make magic system the theme, magic kind of, the mathematics then illustrates the problem, as the whole magic system is about this, like forcing yourself to adapt. And then I can do a change in the magic system where it becomes more like science, a more descriptive one, rather than the rigid structures of mathematics. And I thought that that would be a very interesting theme and a very interesting use of magic. But it all came from, what is the purpose that I wanted to play? In this case, I wanted to play the purpose of an illustration of the thematic and a deepening of the thematic element.
Yeah, when you went down that path, it made me go, oh yeah, like the difference between physics and theoretical physics.
Yes. Yeah.
They both have the same word in them, but they're very, very different.
Very different approaches. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or mathematics and applied mathematics. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is all just above my head. I make stuff up for a living. Yeah. I mean, that's the same for me. I start by thinking about, I usually have some type of conflict or some type of thematic thread or some type of thing that I want to accomplish with the story from a story standpoint. So I kind of start there. And then from there, I go, okay, so what do I need? What does this story need? And that's every element. So when I get to magic, maybe it's a post-apocalyptic world, or maybe it's a high-tech magic world or whatever. And so those those help me dictate, start at least those first kernels of what I want. Do I want the magic to be more mystic? Do I want it to be more scientific? Do I want it to be more,
Mm.
divine? Do I want it to be more this, more that? And so that's kind of usually my starting points for it. Is magic to me as a tool to tell the story. And so, and then I've never done it, but I can see a time where I get to the point where I go, I don't need magic. So let me just
Mm.
do something where magic is just the cool factor, where it's just
Yeah.
this thing that's just really cool to describe and really cool to have, but it doesn't actually have a lot of impact on the world, on the story, on anything. So I've never done that, but that's definitely something I could see a possibility of in the future if I get to more of like a fairy tale type story, which I don't normally write, but I'm always
Or
interested. I love fairy tale type stories.
you can do it. You could do a lot with a just a cool factor thing, like a lit RPG. You could have magic as just a cool factor. It's just a skill.
Yeah. So I'm working on that one lit RPG with my oldest, dearest friend, but that's unique because I don't know how the magic system works. I don't know how anything works. I'm writing the story, but
Yeah.
I have no idea where we're going. I have no idea what's like. So I've got to learn the magic system as I go through it as a character. So I'm really excited to have more time for that. We're not working on it all right now. He is, because he's not a full-time writer, but I don't have time to do my part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's for me. For me, magic has to, there has to be a reason for it to help me tell my story.
Yeah.
I have to integrate it
That
somehow.
that for me is the most important part. Like, what impact does the magic have? And it has the impact that I wanted to have. What do I need?
Hmm.
Right? So, and that's where I like to start. So I like to start with the purpose of magic. And
Hmm.
from the purpose of magic normally comes my um, source of magic, which is my next big question always with the magic system, right? Is what generates the power of the magic system? And you can do this with supernatural power, you can do it with magic systems, you can do it with fantastical elements, you can even do it with science.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're writing science fiction, you can go like quantum physics has advanced to the point where people can collapse can manipulate the collapsing wave function and thus alter reality.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that then forms the basis for your physics. Um, don't ask me exactly how to describe it. My knowledge is slight, but um, but such a thing. Okay, so when you're looking at the source of your magic, you basically have like a couple of big sort of sources. Yeah. And it comes down to you can have magic that comes from a powerful thing and is drawn from it. Okay.
Hmm.
The one source from Wheel of Time is like that.
Hmm.
Okay? Um, there's a couple of other magic systems, but I mean, it's the most famous ones. That basically there's a source of power and you draw from it,
Hmm.
or you can have multiple sources of power and people draw from it. D&D religious magic works like that.
Hmm.
My magic in Sangwil works like that. I've got multiple different power sources, including people themselves, and they can draw from these powers and so
Hmm.
on. You can draw from nature. Okay.
Hmm.
So I came across a very interesting magic system where people like ate parts of nature and then manifested certain abilities. So they would like eat a moth and then be silent and stealthy, or they or they'd eat a frog and be able to sing, stuff like that.
Are frogs famous for singing?
Some
Um,
frogs.
yeah. No, it's that's very close to Mistborn from Sanderson, where you eat
Yeah.
metal and burn it internally and
Yeah.
do your things. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So I call that component magic.
right.
Basically, you go, you find a component, you use the component, and it allows you to do the magic.
Yeah. And you can think outside of the box. I mean, I still think one of my favorite magic systems I ever created was for my cartoon Fiend Folly that I haven't,
Mm.
I was going to pitch before I got cancer and just haven't gotten around to it. But that is a social commentary kind of humor show. It's It's kind of a cross
Mhm.
between South Park and Game of Thrones. So it's, it's very adult, but it is what it is. But when I was thinking about the magic system, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier of like, what am I going to, how is it going to impact the story? And I'm like, well, the whole story is about telling stories about social commentary in a very humorous kind of slapstick, looking at the world through a skewed mirror kind of way. And so I stumbled upon, that the magic system comes from the four base elements. I was actually watching a really crappy Vin Diesel, like Witches something. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't a great movie. But it's Vin Diesel as a witch or something witch or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was watching it, and he actually, because I was working on creating Fiend Folly at the time, and in it, he goes, she's like, well, I don't understand magic. And he's like, it's simple. Magic comes from the four base elements, earth, wind, fire, and water. And at first I groaned because I was like, really? That hasn't been done 1,000 billion times before. But
Yeah.
then I went, wait a minute. Magic comes from the four base elements: fame, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then literally within an hour, I had an entire magic system based off of, how famous you were, or how, you know, much sex you had, or all those different times, or how much
Mm.
drugs you did, or how you played music and rock and roll and everything like that. And so, because the big thing for me is going back to the why. If I'm going to do a
Yeah.
story that's going to pick on social commentary stuff, those four things right there are probably the big four things that affect social, sex, fame, drugs, and rock and roll are the things that like kind of drive culture
Mm.
and society from that side.
Yeah, and 100%. So that's all drawing. That's the same as what I would call drawing from sources. And elemental magic is drawing from sources, right? It's a mystical source of some kind that people draw from, as opposed to the component magic where you draw from a physical thing that's consumed. And they
Mm-hmm.
do slightly different things, but it just alters the way your magic feels.
Mm-hmm.
But the what your source actually is imbues a flavor to your magic. Like your magic, sex, drugs, and rock and roll is our magic system, imbues a flavor to it,
Yes.
right?
And some seriously funny moments.
Yeah. In Sangwheel, I used blood magic a lot as a magic system because I wanted that how far would you go to save the world concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted that ends justify the means question. So the magic system built into that.
Yeah.
Um, in you know so your source of your magic is such an important part of building the magic into the theme. Like it must fit. If you're going to use your magic thematically, your source must fit your theme. Like, what do you want it to feel like? A component magic system, like alchemy or something that you eat or whatever, is really great if you want to do a story about that in any way involves scarce resources. If you even think of like Mistborn, the way that the Lord Ruler controlled the population was by controlling those two god metals, right? And only allowing very limited access to it. It was resource scarcity. The whole story is about resource scarcity.
Yep.
The whole story is a I don't know if it was Sanderson's intent, but it is certainly a story about the class struggle. But that's a different topic
No, it
of
had to be his
conversation.
intent because you had the
Hmm?
ska. It
Yeah,
had to be the intent.
yeah,
You had the nobility and you had the ska. Like
yeah,
the whole story is built off of a class system. So
yeah.
I don't think you can accidentally write a story with a hardcore class system and then go, wow, I didn't realize we're writing a story
I
about a
I
hardcore class
also
system.
don't. But the thing is, like so I was doing a research for the political series on my YouTube channel, my world building channel, where I did a whole series on how to write politics. And so as part of that, I dusted off Das Kapital and read it again, the translated version, because I don't actually, like, I read English. Actually, I don't. Yeah, it is written in German. So I read the Karl Marx's book again. Um, and then I then I paged through Mistborn and I was like, I wonder if Sanderson read Marx because there sure as heck is a lot here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
mean, and
so And
And
so the
that's
magic
where,
system plays into it, right? It's entirely part of that.
I don't understand why people, you meet those occasional writers that are like, oh, I don't want to learn anything about human history because I don't want to copy anything. It's like, but what is a thematic element? A thematic element is something that all humans understand. What are things that all humans understand? Our history and the world we live in and the world around us. So even though I'm writing in a fantasy world, I'm still, every single reader, as I like to say, the in the Genesis saga, the beast man, the lion man's story is all about slavery.
Yeah.
Like, and it's all about the struggles of the lion man race. But I promise you, not one single lion man will ever read that book.
Yeah.
It's not for lion men, it's for humans. And so it's still a very humanizing, very human tale, even though it's, this beast man.
And this is, I get a little frustrated with people who are like, you can't just draw from this culture or that culture, whatever. I'm like, but you must.
Yeah.
What else are you going to draw from?
I think if you did have the ability to create a society that has never existed on Earth, I don't, I would be willing to bet none of your readers would relate to it
Yeah,
because they would have no concept on what to hinge to. So if you
yeah,
actually were smart enough to create a societal system that has never existed in our, whatever you believe how old our society is, which I just don't think anybody's smart enough to actually create something that's never been created before.
mm,
But if you were, I think it would actually be an abject failure because unfortunately, 100% of your readers are earthbound humans and we have our lives that we live. And that's
yeah.
just the way it is. And so even though we're writing these fantastical stories in fantastical places with fantastical races and fantastical societies, every single one of our readers needs to have something that they can relate to something. And that's why, like we started, even with magic systems, the reason why we start with the why, what are we doing thematically? What's the story need the magic to do to help us tell this story is because we don't have magic. Magic doesn't exist, but it still has to be written in a way that is going to impact the human readers in a world that doesn't have magic so that they can get something out of it that
Exactly.
relates to their lives and their way of thinking. So yeah, you just can't do it. And I don't think it can be done, but if you did succeed at it, I would be willing to bet it would fail
Yeah.
miserably.
So anyway, to get back on magic systems, so yeah, I think that the what theme you're looking for influences what your source should be. Then once you have your source, right? So your source is at a very high level. From your source, you go to, okay, now how do people actually use magic?
Mhm.
And you've got a couple of big questions here. How, who has access at
Mhm.
all to magic, right? So you've got kind of two ways of approaching this: genetic or non-genetic,
Learned.
learned.
Mhm.
Learned or otherwise, spoilers for Stormlight Archive if you haven't all caught up on that yet. But in Stormlight Archive, if you suffer emotional trauma, the right spren attached to you, and you can learn magic.
Mhm.
So learned is a stand-in for all the other things.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, a good
and
friend of mine who writes superhero series, which if you're into
mm,
superhero prose, I would highly recommend that you check out Wearing the Cape. It's a really good superhero series. But his magic system, even though it's superheroes, they actually have to have what's called breakthroughs. And
mm,
so basically when something happens where you almost die, you have
mm,
a chance of becoming a superhero. And I think he did a really good job with that because the suicide rate is very high in his world, not because people are trying to commit suicide, they're actually trying to do something that pushes them to almost die so that they have a breakthrough. But the problem is that breakthrough is still a small percentage, and so
yeah,
most people that try it just kill themselves.
most people just die. Yeah.
Right. And I thought that was a really, because that's what would happen. People would go, yeah, I know 90% or 95% of everybody who tries this dies, but not me. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be the one that
I'm
succeeds.
special.
And then we go to your funeral the next day. So I really liked kind of how he thought that through and how it
Mm.
impacted all of society.
Yeah. So genetic systems are very common. Mistborn is a genetic system. I think predominantly, yeah, again, that class struggle thing. I use a partially genetic magic system. The thing with genetic magic systems, what you do need to be cautious and careful about is why haven't people evolutionary selected to the point where everybody has got magic? Now, maybe they have. Maybe your whole world is filled with people who can partially use magic, in which case, no problem, right? But if they haven't, then you need to just consider like why there are people with no magic. Like, well, how does this even happen? Kind of thing. And then it will, depending on your kind of power level, but in all likelihood, if you have a genetic magic system, it will almost certainly impact your politics, your class system, your hierarchy, your cultures, your societies, your everything.
Because
All the
it is
things.
all power. And
Yes.
so people are, Mistborn was a great example of that.
Mm.
Not only did the government control the types of metals that were actually uber powerful, to
Mm.
the point where no one even knew they existed, or very, very few people even knew they existed. But they also, when they did find people, and in that series, not only was it genetic, but it was also genetic, or not, it was passed down by bloodlines.
Mm.
And so they tried to control breeding habits. And if they
Yep.
did, we had the Ska, that lower race. If they did find a Ska that had the ability, they either killed them or they brought them into the fold and had them work for one of the noble houses.
Yep.
And so control was very, very important of that power. And when it is scarce, that's exactly what's going to happen. When you have something like, a society like Harry Potter, where you have just the wizarding world, the government's never going to be able to control it, because every single person is a witch or a wizard. There's
Mm.
no controlling the power from
Yep.
that. And so, how prevalent is in your world dictates a lot of what the society is going to build around it. The more readily available it is to everybody, the more it's just going to permeate through society and become, I always talk about extrapolation when I'm teaching magic. So how is it going to affect all the major things that I just think about technology. So technology
Mm.
affects communication, it connects medicine, it affects travel, it affects food production and storage, it affects war. The major things that technology is going to affect, magic is going to affect.
Maybe. So I actually, you've brought up a topic that I like to talk about sometimes, which is the inherent conflict between magic and technology. Okay. And I know that people say, no, there isn't a conflict, but you're wrong. There is a conflict. And the thing is, at a societal level, technology is essentially a democratizing thing, right? Once it levels the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have guns in wide acceptance, right? What happens? It becomes easier for everybody to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a well-trained person is still going to be more accurate, etc., but it makes the whole thing more even, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. I change the tires on my car every 6 months because that is what we do here in Finland, where it snows the way it does. And I don't have the upper body strength to do it with a small handled nut bolt. So I've got one of those extension ones that give me sufficient leverage, and I can undo my nut bolts with a long enough lever, right?
Although, if you told me you just one-handed picked up one side of the car, I also would not believe that too. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. But the point is that the tool, even such a simple tool, is a democratizing effect. It means that somebody who is not uber strong can make
Yeah.
can have an effect. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Magic is the opposite in almost all cases because it is one person's immeasurable power. Now, maybe there's a cost, maybe there's a price, maybe you have a balance in it, but all that power belongs to one person. It doesn't democratize it for other people
Mm-hmm.
unless you go very, very heavily into magic items, very heavy in magic items, maybe it does, right? Maybe it has
Well,
the same effect.
so but it depends. I mean, that's the thing about all of this. So in the Genesis saga, at least in book one, it does change as the saga goes on. But in book one, that's why I call it carpentry magic, because it can't
100%.
do anything other than what
But
levers can do, and what,
yeah,
it can make
but that's
refrigerators and light stones, and it can make a bath that'll heat up to a temperature, but it can't cast fireballs, or it
except
isn't uber
except
powered.
when Cletus faces those thugs in the alley and he beats the crap out of them because he's an all-powerful mage.
He's an internal
And
mage. Yes.
and that power belongs to him.
Yes.
It cannot be shared with somebody
No.
else. It doesn't influence. It is makes him a superhuman.
Yeah.
And that's
But
what
that's
magic does. It
but just like you
makes, and,
said.
and I mean, there's nothing, I understand there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying
Right,
anything's
right,
wrong
right,
with
right,
it. I'm
right.
saying that there's an inherent conflict here, right? That people often miss. It's what Tolkien actually played with very well. Despite the fact that his magic system is very soft, he leaned into that theme of technology versus magic, where his magic is the magic of earth and of the nature and the kind of traditional way of life and all the rest of that versus the advancement of technology,
Yeah.
right? Now, he came down on the magic good, technology bad, but I mean, Sam, it's that tension that exists there
Yeah.
between these two.
Yeah. And that is, especially depending on how you use magic. But like you said, it also comes down to limitations. So
Mm.
even Clytus, who's an internal combat mage, 5 or 6 people can still take him down if they're willing to have most of them die trying to do it. It's not like he can just go out on a battlefield singly and take on an army. He would die. There was nothing
Yeah,
he
yeah.
could do, because he's sure he can make himself stronger and faster and take more damage, but only by a small exponential component. And then that's the limitation. He doesn't become Superman, because Superman could go out on the battlefield and literally wipe out an entire army and not even take a scratch. But that's you deciding what limitations, and
Mm.
I do want to talk about those. I have my 4 things where I talk about power, limitations, weaknesses, and costs. But that's
Just
you
before we
setting up
get
those
there,
limitations.
just before we get there, I want to talk about the last thing before we get to
Oh yeah,
limitations,
no, I wasn't going there now. I was just saying I want to get there eventually.
which is manipulation. So you've got your why, you've got your purpose, and you've got your manipulation. Now, manipulation, when people talk about hard versus soft magic systems, this is actually what they're talking about.
Mhm.
How many rules are there around your manipulation that the reader knows about? Not that you know about, that the reader knows about. And it's a spectrum. It's not like a fixed, it's not your magic system is either hard or soft. It exists somewhere on a spectrum. Um, if it's very hard, it's close to the Brandon Sanderson side. If it's very soft, it's close to the Tolkien side.
Mhm.
And in between exists all spectrums.
Right.
And manipulation is basically like, do you need a ritual? Do you cast spells? Do you just call on the power and weave it together in threads? Do you, just think of what you manifest, what you want done? Like whatever you have to do to manipulate the power becomes your thing. Then there's a great expression in the Dresden Files, where he's talking about vending machine magic, which I love.
Mhm.
It's like the source of the power is like these old one type entities, like Cthulhu old ones.
Mhm.
And then there's rituals that exist that's like a vending machine. You do the
Yeah.
action and the Coke pops out.
Yeah.
And so that's how you then manipulate that magic and then so on. And so there's all kinds of different ways to manipulate the magic. And something like that vending machine magic would be a hard magic system, very definitive rules for how you do it. Eat a ham sandwich, Coke pops out. Your soft magic systems is things more like Tolkien's. Who knows what's going on there? The ring does weird stuff. The ring does plot stuff, and so on.
Right.
Yep.
Well, it goes one step further than that to me, because yes, I agree with 100% of that, but it also comes down to, when I look at the difference between soft and hard magic, that is actually, in my opinion, the scale of how you can use the magic to influence the plot. So Brandon Sanderson has a quote that I actually really like a lot, but he says, an author's ability to solve a conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. And so when you have a soft magic, if you use magic to solve any problems, it feels like it's unearned because the reader doesn't understand. It's sort of like, the where I always go is, why couldn't at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, Gandalf show up to Frodo and say, hey, you got that ring? And then he takes the ring, he teleports to Mount Doom, he drops it into the volcano, he teleports back, and he's like, all right, you want to go to dinner? Like, why couldn't he do that? We don't know that magic in that world doesn't do that. He didn't do it, so we assume that it doesn't do that, but we don't. That is such a soft magic system. We have no idea. And if that happened, not only would it be a really short story, but it would also be unearned. We wouldn't appreciate it, as opposed to when you define magic, when you really put those rules in and how it's manipulated and everything like that, it is just a tool. It's just like when a farm boy who's never seen a sword leaves the farm and spends the entire novel, making mistakes, but learning and training and growing as a fighter. And at the end, he uses that sword to kill the bad guy. No one ever goes, oh, well, that's cheating. Like, why'd he use the sword to kill the bad guy? Why didn't he, headbutt him or whatever? Like, no, because we understood the rules of the sword. And so when he uses the sword at the end, we're fine with it. We're cool with that. So it's the same thing with magic.
I heard a great quote the other day from somebody about the difference between hard and soft magic systems. They were like, if you're going to use magic to solve the problem, use a hard magic system. If you're going to use magic to create the problem, use a soft magic system.
Yeah, that is good. I like that. I'm going to have to steal that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, because you don't need to understand why the problem was created, but the reader absolutely needs to understand
how it's overcome.
Yeah. And so, that's to me the reason why I think about the difference between hard and soft magic.
Yeah. And again, it's a scale.
It is.
Right. It's like I say, it's not like you've got to, if you're going for a harder system, you've got to go all the way to Brandon Sanderson's kind of things. You don't have to go that hard.
Right.
I do. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, the prologue to Way of Kings is probably my least favorite prologue of Brandon Sanderson.
I agree.
Because like with the best will in the world, like I enjoy Stormlight Archive. But that prologue reads like a video game intro to how to use the magic system.
Yes.
So
100%.
I wouldn't go that hard myself. That wouldn't be my choice. I'm not writing a video game.
Right. Yeah. And somebody from the Peanut Gallery had asked, so hard versus soft is a scale of a spectrum between what understanding then? And I would say yes, but you missed one word. It's the reader's understanding. Yes. How well the reader understands the magic. If the reader doesn't understand it at all and it just does things, then you're running a soft magic system. If you have taken the time to teach the characters, and by default, remember, the characters aren't real. So when you're teaching when you're teaching Harry Potter how to actually use magic, you're not actually teaching Harry Potter because he doesn't exist. You're actually teaching the reader how magic works. Yeah. And so the more you teach, which is why when you look at the Harry Potter series, she actually did a pretty good job of, it starts off kind of a very soft magic system. And what does it do to solve anything? It doesn't really solve anything. But as we get into book 2 and book 3 and book 4, and we get more and more definitions and more things, then it becomes more of that sort.
More plot holes too, and contradictions.
Well, yeah, we're not going in there. We're just talking about magic systems. We're talking about magic systems here. And I think she did a good job with that, because then, it becomes that sword that Harry Potter is wielding, but it's earned. We know that he learned this, and so we know he can use it to overcome the plot.
My biggest problem with the Harry Potter system will always be the fact that she changed the wand lore. And I know she changed the wand lore because in the early books, nothing happened if you disarmed someone.
Yeah.
But in the last book, you disarmed someone, suddenly their wand changes allegiance. It's like, well, that's novel.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something, as a tie-in writer, I try to explain to people, if you're going to get into the tie-in world, the tie-in world is great for helping to build your readership, because you're working for a company that has a built-in fan base, and they like you enough to authorize you to write in their world. And so then you just instantly get access to all of their fans who may or may not have even heard of you before. But it's actually very simple to be successful in the tie-in, and I don't know why so many people fail at it. but it's just two things. One, tell a decent story, and two, don't fricking break canon. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. And that's tie-in. But technically, once you start down a path of a series, you have made yourself a tie-in writer because you're tying into your own IP. And so even though you technically created it, if you didn't lay those breadcrumbs that that this could be broken, that this could be, some adjustments to my magic system, if you just come out of nowhere and break your own canon, it is the same thing as being a tie-in writer and breaking canon. You will just upset your fans. It's just the way it is.
So somebody in the peanut gallery just triggered me. They said, because the special magic was the one wand to rule them all. No. See, everybody says this, but they're wrong, because the Blackthorn wand changed allegiance. Draco's wand changed allegiance. And yet, in the earlier book, Expelliarmus was used on Draco and his wand didn't change allegiance. It only happened in the later books because she wanted to suddenly show this mechanic. Literally. Like, I know that it came in because of the Elder Wand, and the Elder Wand had its own stipulations, but I promise you, she changed the whole wand lore. Sorry. Sorry. It's a pet peeve of mine because everybody says that on a video that I did about it, and they're all wrong. I checked the notes on it.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, it's just been too long since I've read that. I only, I did read it a few times, but it's still been, because I think the last time I read it, my kids were in the 5-year-old range, and now they're in their 20s. So, because I think I read it before they were born, and then I read it to them when they were like 4, 5, and 6, at least the first couple, because then the oldest one, who literally has read the internet and is waiting on the internet to write some more content so he can actually have something to read, just finished the series without us. And my youngest son, you can't force him to read. Like, you just can't. It's torture to him.
So it doesn't really matter. My point is just like, be careful with your magic system. If you make something central to it and you're going to break that law, you need to have a really good reason.
Yeah.
If she had
and you
actually
have to
done
at
that
least
just for the Elder Wand, that would have worked better for me.
Mhm.
But she
and you have to at
didn't.
least hint at it. You have to put
Yeah.
some. It's like a murder mystery.
Yeah.
The number one thing that pisses off murder mystery fans is when you get to the end and you find out the murderer is X, and there's literally not one single way to have figured that out on your own. Now, murder mystery readers know that they're not going to figure it out usually, and some do, obviously, but most of the time you go, of course, and because you think back and you go, yes, how did I miss this clue? It's sort of like the Sixth Sense, when you're like, what do you mean he's dead? There's no way he's already dead. Oh, crap. In the opening scene, he gets shot and killed. Like, how did I miss that? How did I not put 2 and 2 together? That this
and then you go
dead?
back and you're like, oh, everybody was gray. How did I miss this?
Right. Yeah. And the only color is the red. And the only person that ever talks to him is the boy. And the only person he ever talks to, like, all the clues are there.
Oh, my goodness.
And so you're not pissed.
Yeah.
But so, like, in a murder mystery, when it just comes out, like the one Agatha Christie book that pisses me off that I talk about all the time is when the POV was the murderer. And you're like, no, I was with him as we were trying to find the killer. And the whole time he knew he was the killer. Like, no, like,
that doesn't work.
This doesn't work for me. And so it's the same thing with your magic system, or really not just magic system. It works with any of your canon. If you don't at least have something that you can, even if it's a mistake, because I've had that happen where I wrote something that I thought I was going to use one way, but later it actually makes sense that is a hint to that I'm changing this thing that I didn't realize I was going to be doing, but it's still, I can point back to and go, no, right there. See, that's on purpose, even though it wasn't, but it still fit. But if you come out of nowhere, it doesn't make readers happy.
Yeah.
It's not going to make them happy.
And that's why I also caution against going too hard with your magic system. Because if you lay out all the rules, it becomes harder and harder to make changes.
Yes.
All right. So less is more to a certain extent. Give the reader what they need to understand how the magic system is being used, but not like video game levels.
So that is really, really pertinent advice to a
Yeah.
pantser. If you are a heavy plotter and you do spend the time figuring things out so that you're changing it while you're in plotting mode, and so you've planned for it, then it's less, because it's less important to me. So I can be a lot more specific. Now, it doesn't mean
Except
that I
you
don't get
just
into
said that you change stuff
yeah,
later on.
yeah. No, I'm not saying it doesn't mean that I don't get somewhere where I go, wow, I wish I would have planted this seed. And I've definitely had that happen many, many times where I get to a spot where I go, man, I would really love to do this thing. It would be so awesome for the story. But since I didn't plan for it, or since I've already set that rule up, now that is off the table to me. And so it's this desire that I have to let go, because if I use it, I'm breaking my own canon. That's why I said there's been a couple of times where I've gone back and there was something that I thought I was going to use one way, but it still works for this other thing. And so I can go a direction that I wasn't planning, because there are
And
seeds, laid down.
and you can adapt. Even a very hard magic system can be changed, but you have to do it with sufficient preparation.
Yes.
The reader
And that's
has
why I
to
said
understand what's happening, be able to follow it, and therefore go, oh, okay, this is now how it's changed. I mean,
yeah,
if you think about our world, we used to think, that bleeding people is good for their health. Turns out that no, losing half your blood content is not good for your health.
it's really good for my health.
But
But I
not
have a health
half
issue.
your blood content.
No, a pint. Pint every 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, and I mean, I was doing some research on healing techniques and so on, and I read what the doctors did to President Garfield when he got shot. And let me tell you, that is not a good way to die. It really, they fed him by enema because they had wrecked his stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
the few days he lived past getting shot, or the month or so he lived past getting shot, was not great.
Yeah.
Not what I would wish on my worst enemy,
Yeah. I hope I die like my grandfather, peacefully in his sleep.
Yeah.
Unlike the rest of the people in the car that died screaming.
But yeah, so and I mean, President Garfield wasn't that long ago,
Right.
And in the time in between, we've changed. Like, we now know a hell of a lot more about medicine. We've got pills that would make people go magic. If you took,
Yeah. We also realized that big orange cats make terrible American presidents. So I said, we also
What?
realized that big orange cats make terrible American presidents. So we changed there too.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
yeah.
are you talking about a different Garfield?
No, I'm talking I'm talking
Because
about
I'm only talking about the spaghetti loving cat. I didn't realize he was our president at one point, but yeah, I would have voted for him.
But yeah, so anyway, the thing is, like, you can change a hard magic system, you can, but you need to make sure that you put in the work. So
yeah, and that goes. So I talked about, I do want to eventually talk about the powers, limitations, weaknesses, costs, but it goes to also, so like when you started talking about costs a little while ago, I was going to save this for them, but it still is the same thing. It's also about defining something that you end up becoming a problem for you that you can't use. So like I love The Wheel of Time. It's still one of my favorite series. I love Robert Jordan. He's still one of my favorite authors. I'm going to dog him, but not because of anything but love. But that is the one thing that I hated about the cost to the male side of magic, was it made you go insane. But the main character is a male magic user that has to use magic to save the world. And so in theory, that's great. It's, oh, look at this character who has to risk insanity, but he's willing to risk insanity to actually accomplish this. But nowhere in the story does it ever affect him ever.
Yeah.
His friends are always wondering if he's going insane, but every time you're in his head, he's not affected by it at all. And so that was bad for me, because it's like you basically threatened us with something that was never going to be used. Yeah. And so do be careful of that too. If you If you
You
make
want to be
something,
careful of the price of your magic. You don't
Mhm.
like you don't want to in price of magic is where a lot of people inadvertently step on a mine on a
Yes,
like a landmine.
yeah,
Like, and I'm not saying this is for everyone or whatever, but I read the Greenbone saga, and it's very good. I recommend it and all the rest of that. But it did for me trigger thoughts around addiction, and I didn't feel that those thoughts were very well handled
mm,
in by the narrative. Um, and so, like I say, I'm not saying you you can't use something like you could get addicted to magic as a price. I'm just saying be aware that themes like that come with baggage. Be aware what you're doing, All men go crazy if they use magic comes with an automatic implication that men can't handle power.
hmm.
That's kind of the thematic implication.
Oh, power corrupts.
Yeah. But you're saying men go
Right,
nuts.
right, 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 right. Yeah,
Not
no, I see
women,
what you're saying.
men.
Yeah,
Like what are you implying here?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And that's the
um,
thing, I talk about a lot in the writers' room with the writers. I keep saying, remember, it doesn't matter what you think the paragraph you just wrote is
mm,
supposed to make the reader feel. It only matters what the reader feels. So
mm,
that's why one of our rules is you can't argue with somebody who tells you that this thing you just read makes them feel a certain way, because it did
yeah.
make them feel a certain way. Like, period. You may have not wanted it to make them feel that way, but that's your fault. Now you need to go adjust the writing because something in there makes the reader feel that way.
The
So
only question you can ask is why did it make you feel that way?
right,
Like if you don't understand why.
right, exactly.
Because that will help you understand what you need to fix.
So somebody brought a couple weeks ago a thing, and every one of us at the end was like, okay, so your POV character wants to kill everyone. It's a sci-fi thing. So,
Mm.
and the POV was the captain, and so it's like, okay, so your POV wants to kill every one of her crew. She's literally a psychopathic murderer. And the writer was like, what? No, what are you talking about? And we were like, this line, this line, this line, this line. And so this week she brought the same piece back, but she had rewritten it. And it was actually filled with a room of people who hadn't heard it. So I was the only one who had. And so she then asked at the end, because we always have the thing where I say, do you have any questions for us? She's like, yeah, does anybody feel that the main character is a psychopath killer that wants to kill all of her crew? And I'm like, what line in here do you, before anyone answers, what line in here do you think would lead them down that path? And she's like, I don't think there are any. And I'm like, right. And then, everyone's like, yeah, no, I do not feel like, but she had so many lines that
Yeah.
I could tell, there was a reason for her intent for writing them the first time, but they were going to be interpreted as this character is a
Mm.
psychopath and just wants to kill and doesn't care if they're working for her or not.
Yeah.
And so it was just the way they were written.
There's an interesting question in the chat that says, what about people who act as conduits where the magic isn't theirs? Does that change anything? So yes and no. It depends. If your magic is like Robert Jordan, it's the one source and people channel it, then the mage is effectively still the mage, even if they're a channeler, right? It's just what price do they pay for channeling the magic? Does it hurt them? Can they only channel a certain amount? All of that becomes questions, right?
They channel too much, so they get burnt out.
Yeah. But there are other kinds of channels. Okay, so there's physical item channels, like things like what Harry Potter's wand that basically act as a means to manipulate magic. But there's another magic system, and I am flabbergasted. You can flabber my ghast if I can remember. I think it was one of the Weiss Hickman magic systems. But anyway, where magic takes two people. So there's the mage and there's the channel, and they have to both work together. Right? The channel can't use magic. They can only channel power. The mage can't channel magic, and they can't use raw magic. It will burn, it'll kill them. But when the channel sends their magic, they can use it. So it's this constant partnership between the two. Now, if I remember correctly, the theme there was that in that world, it had become a situation where mages that basically enslaved channels,
Mhm.
because of course they had. I mean, yeah,
Right.
where would such a system end? Of course it would end
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I'm not going to ever
Not in
treat a
equal
battery.
partnerships. No, one of us will embrace the other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm never going to partner with one of my batteries.
Yeah.
It's going to work for me when I want it to work for me. I mean, it's a battery. I'm never going to see it as anything other than a battery.
And that's pretty much anyway. So, so the whole story was basically about channels, But anyway,
Mhm.
it was actually
But
very good.
this is the same, but it's different because it's also it's not a channel; it becomes the source. But a
Yeah.
lot of your witch type
Mm,
stories, like I don't have magic, like I don't have the ability to just create magic, but I can take your life. I can
mm,
suck your life energy or your soul or drink your blood or whatever, which kills you. But then I use that for, whatever. So technically, it goes back to what we were talking about, where that actually is the source now. It's not just
mm.
a channel. So it's not like there's a power source outside of that that comes through you that then comes through me.
Yeah,
But, it is kind of the same thing. And
yeah,
so when you have, and that would fall into one of the costs. So one of the costs of it, like in Harry Potter, anyone can be immortal. You just have to be willing to chop your soul up and murder a bunch of people. As long as you're
yeah,
willing to do those two things, you can be immortal.
yep.
And so, same thing with like witch magic or blood magic or whatever, that you use someone else's blood or somebody else's life force. The cost is you have to be willing to do this, which means you're bad. Like you're not going to have a goody two shoes character that's, trying to do it. I do have one story. Right now it's a short story out there, but originally I wanted to make it um, a full novel. I just never had time, so I just did a short story on it. But basically, it's a guy who is fighting kind of a dimension that's underneath ours to try to keep them at bay. But the only way he gets power is he has to basically kill people, and the better that person is, the more morally just and the more kind and the more everything is, the more power he gets from them. But
Mm.
he is a good person, so like he's in this situation where it's like, if I don't do this, everyone dies. So I've kind of got to do it, but I'm a good person and this kills me to do this. And so he's this very tortured soul
Mm.
of a character who is forced to kill the best of humanity to have the power to be able to save the rest of humanity. And I really love that idea and I love that story.
I don't know if you've ever read those who leave Ulthulis. Hold on, let me find the name.
Matter of
Um,
fact, I'll do this. So we're recording
Ursula
this in January. While you're looking that up, we're recording this in January. It probably won't come out until February at the earliest, maybe even the beginning of March.
Omelos.
So I'll do this. That story is called The Monster in Me, and it hasn't been published in probably a decade. But so what, March? I will make that. So if you guys join my mailing list at Starving Writer Studio, every month you also get something that I'm writing, either my current work in progress or like this month in January, I gave out a short story called Holocaust that was published a long time ago. I will make The Monster in Me April's freebie in the April newsletter. So, you know, what? Let's do May. Just give it a little extra time. I'll do it in May.
If you,
So
yeah,
so
and
join
that'll
my
be for,
mailing list at Starving Writer Studio. You'll get other
and
things too, so you should do it ahead of that. But May, I'll make it The Monster in Me, and you can see what I'm talking about.
if you if you join my mailing list, you get world building stuff.
Yes.
That's what's in my.
And
um,
honestly, if you guys are not watching Just in Time Worlds, you're missing out. I have never met, worked with, dealt with another writer who knows world building deeper than Murray.
Thank you.
So I highly recommend that you guys go check it. I don't understand how you keep doing it week after week after week, because your topics are always just so different and so in depth, and like people really should be watching. Although your channel is way bigger than our channel, so I don't know why I'm pimping that channel, because you should be pimping our channel. But it is a great. If you guys have not checked out Just in Time's World, I highly recommend that you do that.
Thank you. Yeah, so the story that was referencing there when you spoke about monsters is Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a story called Those Who Leave Omelos.
Mm,
And I don't know if anybody's read it. It's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelos. So it's probably her most, for me, it was one of her most haunting stories. And basically, it's this: the world is a utopia, not half a utopia, a genuine utopia. Okay. Nobody's starving. Nobody needs anything. There's enough for everyone. There's not too much. People live. It's beautiful. Okay? It is a utopia, idyllic existence. But it depends on everybody leaving a single child in the dark, never talking to it, never interacting with it, never loving it.
Oh my
You
God.
go to the door, you look in at the child, and you must walk away and leave the child in the dark.
Oh my, I was gonna say I
And
love
in
Ursula.
return, you get utopia.
Wow. Like I love Ursula, and actually, you saying that just made me go. You know what? That's gonna be my next book that I read this month. I haven't read Earthsea in forever, and so I want to go back
Yeah.
to Earthsea. Um, and then you were talking about this, and I wrote it down. I was like, okay, so I haven't even heard of the story. I should check it out. And then you get to there, and I'm like, I don't know if cross that one out right there. I don't know if that's a story that is for me. I'll just not, because that's woo, that's rough.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I could read that.
It
Like,
it was haunting.
yeah,
Haunting.
yeah. I think I'll just go back to Earthsea. That was,
Earthsea is a lighter read.
yeah.
Although Tombs of Atan was, I love Tombs of Atan and Earthsea. Anyway, but
But I
yeah,
mean
Earthsea was a great
but
story.
that is a serious cost.
Yeah.
That's a serious. Now I'm hoping that in that story somebody struggles with that.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the
Yeah,
gist
yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah.
story?
I mean,
Somebody,
but yeah, yes. I mean, well, read this, but it's amazing. Like that's the whole thing. Is that it is that the theme of it is that internal struggle. Is like, is that a price worth paying? Is the unhappiness of one child a price worth paying?
yeah, yeah. But here's so someone else. Since you went off on a rant, I'll go off on a rant by
Mm.
something from the Peanut Gallery. They had written, yeah, but my dad recently said, "What's the point? It's all been done before." Yes, like one of the soul crushing things about getting into this and learning structure and learning all the theories and learning everything. So everyone's heard like the 3 basic plots or the 7 basic plots or the 13 basic plots or whatever. I think that's all bullcrap. I think there's only one. There's only one type of story, and it's moving from one thing to something else. It's transformation. That's every story has transformation in it. That's what has to happen. The story isn't a story without it. So when you start learning this stuff and you start realizing that you're actually writing the same one story that every other person has written for the last 10, 15,000 years, it is a little soul crushing. It's like, well, what's the point? Like everything's been done. There is no new. But like we talked about earlier in this, if you created new, I don't know if it would resonate with anybody. It wouldn't work for anybody. And so that is soul crushing. And it does make you go, well, what's the point? Well, the point is that you start learning that it's not about creating new, it's about mixing it in new ways. I mean, guitars have 6 strings. We're not done making songs. It's about figuring out a new way to mix the elements that we already have, which is humanity, which is a lot of elements. It's not 6 strings. We have millions and millions of strings. And there's just no way to run out of how that's mixed. And so the challenge comes, if you want to know where the challenge is, like what's the challenge in writing the same story that everyone's written for the last 10,000 years? The challenge is you have to write the same story that everyone's written for the last 10,000 years, and it has to feel unique.
Yes, but it's also like even like that story of Omelos, right? It's an amazing story, but stories like it have been told, maybe not in that
Yeah.
configuration, but the thematic element and how she explored it is important,
Yeah.
which is the same thematic element you explored with your dude, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
slightly different sacrifice, but it's also like it's the same thing that I'm exploring, right? Which is, does the ends justify the means? Where do you
Mm-hmm.
draw the line? Like where,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about your exploration of this, and other people read your stuff and they explore these themes.
Mhm. Yeah. So storytelling is actually incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
So don't fall into the trap of what's the point? It's all been done before. It
Mm.
has. But, in my dynamic story creation, I've got a chapter called spaghetti. And it's not a
Mm.
euphemism. It's literally a chapter on spaghetti. And I talk about, all spaghetti is the same. It's red meat sauce with noodles.
Yeah.
They have the same, basic spices, the same basic everything. And yet, every one of us have had the scale from our grandmother's is amazing and there's nothing better to the school cafeterias is disgusting and no one wants to eat it. It's the same exact thing. It's the same ingredient, same everything. So that is it. And that's why when I'm at a writer's conference and I meet somebody where they're there, so they spent, $400 or $500 for the ticket. They spent travel, they spent hotel, they spent food, they took time off of work. So let's say they're out $1,500 on the low
Yep.
scale. And then I'm talking to them and I'm like, well, what are you writing? And they go, well, I haven't started writing yet. I haven't come up with my unique idea yet. I always want to go, oh, honey, let's talk. Like, this is not, you're not smarter than every single human being that has told stories for the last 10,000 years. I'm sorry to inform you. I know your mother thinks you are, but you're not. And if you're waiting for that thing that you're going to create that has never been created before. And actually, the funny thing is, I actually had somebody go, no, I'm waiting to create something unique like Hunger Games. And I'm like, yeah, Hunger Games is exactly like, and I don't remember anymore, but it was an anime. There's an anime that's the exact same story. And I'm like, it's the exact same story. There's no difference other than a little bit of a different flair to it. And I'm like, yeah, there is no such thing as a unique idea. It's just ways of mixing things that have never been done before.
I'll tell you something really odd. I was doing research into empires for Sangwil Tales, the next series in Sangwil, and I landed on the Hittite Empire as the inspiration for the Empire of Immervin. And they had, to win their throne, the heirs of the emperor had to compete blood sport style against each other, and the losers all die and the winners get the throne. Don't say it hasn't been done.
That is a loving
it's
parent.
Been done.
That's a loving parent. That's just somebody who really loves their children. That's
Absolutely.
all I'm saying.
But yeah.
Or at least loves one of their children.
The one who wins gets it all.
I don't know which one I love yet. They haven't fought, but I love one of them more than the others. I promise you.
Yeah. So I mean, it's all like, this is not, like it's echoes. We've seen this kind of thing before.
Yeah.
And people draw on these things, whether they knowingly draw on them or not, right? Sometimes there's just stuff that permeates the culture to the extent where you draw on it without even knowing about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
if you don't study this stuff and you're just writing off the hip, you're not actually writing off the hip. You're writing off of your life experiences and things that have influenced you and things you've watched and read and heard and felt. And like,
exactly.
A story comes from an author's well of experience. That's why this is an older person's game. If you're out there and you're 16, 18, 20, your stories are not going to be as dynamic as somebody who's in their 30s. You just haven't lived as much life.
And since people often ask why are so many stories, why is so much of fantasy Eurocentric? The reason why so much fantasy is Eurocentric is because most people write off their experience, not of like deep research or whatever. And they're mostly European, mostly male authors. So they write mostly male stories, mostly Eurocentric.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing evil about it. There's nothing misogynistic about it. Everybody is going to write what they're comfortable with.
It's not a conspiracy. It's an effect of the authors. That's why, like, it is actually important to encourage female authorship and non-European authorship and so on, because that naturally results in diversity in the in the books being published.
Okay. And my first published novel, I didn't have a female POV, and I got docked for that. And okay, fine, but the reason why I didn't write a female POV was not because of misogyny or any of that stuff. It was because I was terrified of writing from a female perspective because I didn't think I would do it justice. I thought I would do a crappy job. I wasn't comfortable enough to actually try and accomplish that. So I didn't do it, not for any other reason then I just
Yeah.
didn't think I would do a good job.
You know why I wrote, you know why my first main character was Louis and he's a man, and I wrote in a very kind of almost inspired by Rome world?
Hmm.
It's because I was like, well, if it turns out I'm a crappy writer, he'll be just one more crappy guy protagonist, and he'll just drown in a sea of crappy, like it's very common. But if I write like if I take inspiration from elsewhere, like I write an African thing with like a female hero, and I screw that up, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So let me go do the crap with a guy. Like it'll just vanish among the other crap.
And it's not, you're not doing that for a conspiratorial reason. You're just like, and that's the thing. So many people put it's, and we've talked about this before. It's like when the college professor's up there and it's
Sorry,
like,
and that's why now 600,000 words in, I now do have my African inspired empires and my,
mhm,
my female POVs and all the rest of that, because I'm now confident that I'm going to do it well.
right,
But I thought it was my first one. Let me just take the thing that's the most common in my genre.
right.
And if it's bad, it'll just vanish.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I now have female POV characters and,
Yeah.
so on and so forth, because I've just gotten better, more confident, whatever. But it's exactly like we talked about many times on this, where we say, the college professor is up there dissecting a book and they're like, well, obviously the author chose to make the curtains blue because it has this representational thing and there's this big thematic element. And the author's like, yeah, no, I was writing in a hotel and I needed a color for the curtains, and the hotel had blue curtains. And so I just made them blue. Like, there's no reason for it at all. People
Yeah.
do put a lot of more reasons behind things.
There is only one author where you have to think about every single word they put on the page, and that's Immanuel Kant. And if you've ever tried to read Kant, then you will know that it is a horrifying experience. It is extremely exhausting. You read a page, you look at the end of it, you go, I have no idea what I read. Let me try that again. By the fifth time you read the same page, you're starting to get a concept of what he means. Not every word you choose has to be that important. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Let's finish up. I kept referring to the 4 things that I talk about during my
Yeah.
magic class. So I'd like to finish up at least with that, because we are kind of running
Yes,
long in
we
the
are
tooth.
at time. Well over,
Um,
perhaps.
So just to kind of go through them. So when I'm teaching, once you get to that point, all the stuff we talked about, the whys, the themes, the how does it impact your story, whether you're doing soft or hard, and how much you can use it and all that. When I'm actually creating the actual magic system, actually working on what it is, there are 4 things that I try to make sure I think about. The first is the powers, and those are the easy part because that's the cool stuff. Spider-Man can stick to walls, he can shoot webs, he can, whatever, his powers. He can sense danger, he's strong. Those are really easy, and I don't spend a lot of time on them. The next is limitations. I think it's vitally important to think about what magic will never do, and then never do it. So, like, one of the things that I have across the board, I've never broken this rule, not saying that I won't in the future if the story dictates it, but like one of my limitations that I have in every single magic system is death is permanent. There is no coming back, because I feel like, because I write such serious dark stories, that if I take that off the table, if you can be resurrected, then there's no consequence to death. So who cares if you're going to sacrifice, if you're going to take the risk of dying to save the world, whereas if you do die, they'll just bring you back to life. Like, that's not a consequence. So limitations are very important. What can magic not do? Weaknesses are, how can we take magic away from the characters? So like in Harry Potter, take the wand away, no magic. That's a weakness. In Mistborn, take the metal shavings away. If you can't eat any metal shavings, or like we talked about with the Emperor, hoarding those 2 special types of metals, take the metals away and there's no magic. So if you ever need a scene or whatever where your character can't use magic, you just use the weakness. You take it from them, and then now they don't have it. And then the last, which we talked about some, is what are the costs? Are there costs? And just be the thing that I would always say is be very, 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 very careful with costs, because if you set a cost too high, like with Wheel of Time, and never use it, it's a hole in your system and it feels like it. If you set a cost that's high, but then ignore it, so like the cost for Darth Vader to get to use the dark side of the force is murdering an entire school of children. Well, then you're going to have people like me that when you get to the end of that and go, oh, no, the whole story is about Darth Vader's the hero. I'm like, no, he murdered children. He's not a hero. He's done. Like, I will never see him as he cannot be redeemed. I'm like, oh, but he saved his child's life. Hitler would have saved his own child's life. Like, that's not a hero. That's somebody who's being narcissistic and saving their own child. Like, he murdered a school full of children. He is irredeemable to me. And again, if you feel differently, that's great. I have no problem. I'm not telling you that's how you have to feel. I'm telling you that's how I feel. So be careful with your costs. And then somebody did throw in kryptonite from Superman, and that would be weaknesses. That's the one warning that I always make of weaknesses is try to be a little bit more than one. So, because then it becomes like in Harry Potter, it becomes kind of rote. It's like, oh, look, he lost his wand. It's because he can't have magic in the scene. Oh, look, there's kryptonite. It's because Superman can't have his superpowers. Like, if you just have one, you end up leaning on it over and over and over again. So building in a little bit more than one weakness is always advisable for the weaknesses. And then costs, just think about the ramification of that cost. If the cost is too high, it may hurt your story. You know, the cost that I usually go with is just fatigue, and then burnout if you go even further than that or whatever, because then I can use that cost also as a weakness and be able to take magic away from someone. So like we were talking about Klytus earlier. Sure, he's basically a Superman if it's 1-on-1, 1-on-2, 1-on-3. But you get him 1-on-10, he's going to die. He's just going to die. That is just a weakness that's going to be exploited. He only has so much power.
That is one of the places where component magics really shine, because they come with a built-in cost.
Yes.
You have the component or you don't have the component.
Built-in weakness.
You don't, well, it's a cost as well, because you've got to use the component.
Well, but by cost, I mean, as in, what does the character have to pay to use it? That's not just money. But
that's the thing. Like, they might literally need to buy the component.
No, but I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about, a piece of your soul, a piece of your...
But it is a thing that comes in with its built-in weaknesses. And component magics come with a lot of that. Yeah. And that's why they are easier to balance than source magics.
Now, that being said, if it's oh, I need some parsley to cast this magic, and that's why I don't consider that a cost. Sure, it's a cost that I have to spend a copper piece to buy the parsley, but that's not the cost we're talking about. Now, what is a cost on a component is I have to leave my firstborn child alone in a room to die. That is a component, yes. It's also a huge cost, because you're basically giving up a piece of your humanity. And so that's what I mean by costs. Costs are something that affect the humanity of the character, not the pocketbook of the character.
Yeah.
So it's splitting hairs. It really is splitting hairs as far as the difference. But yeah, that's what I mean by costs. So powers, limitations, weaknesses, and costs are what I really kind of divided out when I'm creating my magic systems. And honestly, I rarely go heavy on costs. Like I said, I lean toward fatigue or whatever, which means now it's really more of a weakness than a cost, by my own definition. So I just was a hypocrite and stepped on my own definition of cost, because that wouldn't be a cost now that I'm walking through it. It would be a weakness, because fatigue would just be a weakness. That's how I can take magic away from this character. But it doesn't cost the character any of his humanity to do that. So be careful with that.
I came across a magic system once that was fueled by memories. So you have to yield a piece of your memory to use magic. And I was like, that's...
Now, did you come across that, or is that my short story that I'm supposed to be writing? Because remember, you helped me plot that short story, and that's what we ended up kind of settling on.
I came across it in the wild.
Okay. Well, that's sad. Not that I'm not going to write my short story, but that is one of the things, with the short story that I'm writing with the POV that's blind. Remember, the cost, the payment was, it's not the cost to the character, but the payment was memories.
Yeah.
And so that was a really interesting kind of system.
It's a very interesting cost.
So, and that is a piece of your humanity. I mean, your memories, your childhood, the face of your mother, all of those things, those are Those are humanity and as somebody said, your identity.
Yeah.
So what makes you an individual?
If you're very keen to have like a worksheet or whatever, and you go to my website and you follow the link to my Ko-fi page, there is a free worksheet on my Ko-fi page for your magic system development. So you can go ahead and download that if you want.
And that one goes into such detail about how it affects society, how it threads through your world building. Like, it's an amazing worksheet, and it will force you to think about things that I don't think most people even dream they need to think about. But when you start thinking about them, it really helps flesh out your world and flesh out your story and make it feel more real. So definitely, because it's mariemullaney.com, right?
Yeah, mariemullaney.com.
So all the links will be in the description below.
Yeah, so I think that is a good note on which to end this episode. I think we have run magic systems to ground. If you would like us to cover any specific magic systems or talk about any specific aspects, let us know in the comments. And other than that, we will see you.
Or send us an email to releasingyourinnerdragon@gmail.com.
Do that as well, absolutely. And we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.
If you are ready to take your writing to the next level and work with a group of highly motivated, dedicated writers who are all working to not only improve their writing, but improve your writing, plus you get to work with me on a weekly basis, then I'll encourage you to check out writersroom.us. This is a website that I have created that I really wish I had 30 years ago. It's everything a writer needs to become a better writer. Not only do we do weekly critique sessions, both from other members as well as me, we have daily writing sessions, I do monthly classes, Q&As, we have activities, I do all sorts of learning exercises, such as I do a quarterly writing prompt contest, and just tons and tons and tons of things. So if you're ready to get serious about your writing and you want to actually finish that novel and have a chance of it being published, then I encourage you to head on over to the Writer's Room and join me there. And as a special promotion for listeners of Releasing Your Inner Dragon, I'll go one step more. If you would like to get 50% off for 3 months, reach out to me. There's a million ways you can do that. You can do it through starvingwriterstudio.com, drakeu.com, any of my social medias such as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, whatever. Reach out to me, say that you would like to check out the Writer's Room for 50% off, and I will send you a link that will allow you to do just that. So hopefully you're ready to start getting serious about writing, and I'll see you in the Writer's Room.
Thank you for tuning in. This is Marie Mullaney, your co-host on this literary adventure. Our goal is to provide you with valuable insights and discussions on writing. If you believe in our mission, please like and subscribe our podcast. Sharing our episodes with your community not only helps us grow, but also contributes to a richer, more diverse conversation about storytelling. We appreciate your support. For a deeper understanding of the topics we've discussed, head over to Just in Time Worlds on YouTube. It is a treasure trove where fantasy meets history and science. Every Tuesday, you'll find new videos that delve into the intricacies of world building, drawing from our rich real-world history. Whether you're a writer, a role player, or just a fantasy enthusiast, Just in Time Worlds offers unique insights that will enrich your perspective. Check it out and join the journey of crafting incredible worlds.